You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we look forward to seeing you there. The 602 Club proudly presents Snyder Cuts, a Zack Snyder Directorial Podcast, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as he is every single week, my baby doll.
Really? That's the one you're going to go with? That's the one you're going to go with. Okay. All right, then. That's how this is going to go.
Oh, well, you know, I've never seen you dance, though, so...
Well, it would end
probably
in
not
horror.
this good. No.
Well, it is better if
the goggles to do nothing.
it would be a lot better when I dance if people did in fact vacate to some sort of fantasy realm. So maybe that's where it's similar.
Or just had a lobotomy, I guess. You know.
Yeah.
So,
well, you know.
Yeah. Anyway,
we all cope in our own ways.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to be here. Obviously, we're having a blast to just walking through all of Zack Snyder's directorial works. We're at Sucker Punch, as you can tell. Before we dive into everything, of course, you know, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please give the 602 Club a star rating and review, which is where you can find Snyder Cuts, and then we'll read that out on the show. You can also find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We've got the website, trek.fm, where the contact section, you can send us an email. We've got the listeners-only discussion group on Facebook where you can talk to listeners from all over the world. It's called the Babel Conference. Just search for that, and we can let you in. Okay. So, John, I would say this is going to be a fantastic episode in the sense that this is one of the few Zack Snyder movies, I think, where we're coming in very differently. So I'm going to go first real quick, just because, for me, I've seen this before, but we're watching the extended cut. So I've never seen the extended cut until now. And I will also admit, my first reaction to the theatrical cut, I wouldn't say was like super positive. Like, it was okay. I guess it was okay at the time. I don't know if, like, you know, when you were talking about watching Legend of the Guardians, you know, you just weren't kind of in the mood, you know, when you started it, and you just, I think that maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what happened to me in that first one. But it just, I don't know, this was one of the few Zack Snyder movies where I didn't have a, you know, positive reaction to my first time to watch it. So I'm really kind of fascinated to see then how, you know, is this your first time? Have you ever seen it before? Which version?
No, I've never seen it. I've never seen any version before. The reputation of Sucker Punch precedes it. I know that it's been absolutely savaged. Before I watched it, I was like, oh, so where is it sitting on Rotten Tomatoes? Which, granted, is not the best sort of thing to go check, because, you know, when we agree with critics, they're brilliant. When we don't agree with critics, they're terrible monsters who are out to eat our joy as a wolf devours, helpless Little Red Riding Hood or something. But so I think was it 23% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, or something like that?
It's pretty low.
Which, for
apparently,
the record,
the glowing review from Sonny Bunch was not enough to overcome the other critics. So,
well, what's really interesting is I believe that it's either equal to or less than the critical rating of Star Trek V on Rotten Tomatoes. We all know that Star Trek V is my shining North Star by which to figure out where other things are in relation. And so I knew people that had hated it. I have friends where I have one friend in particular where every so often I would say, oh, you know what? I've never seen Sucker Punch. It looks kind of interesting. And his first response was, you're good. You don't need to see it. It's terrible. Oh, okay. Well, you know, and we all trust our friends and stuff like that. So yeah, I came into this cold. I mean, I knew enough about it to know what the concept was. I remember seeing ads for it, and I remember not going to go see it. When did this come out again? 2000? Was this 2009?
It is 2011.
2011. Okay. So yeah, 2011, I mean, I'm in the throes of fatherhood by that point, and, it's getting, it's getting busy and stuff like that. So this wouldn't have been top of the list, and it just sort of never rose up the ranks with me because of that reputation.
Right.
Like, we can all pretend that the reputation a movie gets doesn't affect us, and we're very open-minded, and it could very well be true. But when it comes down to it, and you've made your queue of things to watch, and you have a choice between something that's getting raves and something that's 23% on Rotten Tomatoes, 100% of the time you'll say, I'd rather spend my hour and a half watching the thing that got the Oscar,
I don't know. Over quarantine, I did subject myself to some things like Masters of the Universe and Conan the Barbarian.
Okay, look, Masters of the Universe is cheesy good fun, and Conan the Barbarian has one line that means it should forever be venerated as a great film, but only one line in specific. So
give the line so at least we have some context.
Conan, what is good in life? Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, hear the lamentations of the women. That right there, that's the exchange that
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
That earns Conan all of its praise.
Yeah, just play that GIF and you'll be good.
Exactly.
It is interesting too because both of us coming into this, this is another movie where Zack Snyder's film theatrically isn't necessarily exactly what he would have released if it was his choice.
Mm-hmm.
So, just a little bit of background then. The extended cut is more of the R rating that Snyder was going for. The movie was originally released as PG-13. Some of the big changes have to do with there's 18 extra minutes. So you've got the whole dance scene that was the end credits of the theatrical cut with Oscar Isaac and Carla Gugino's number of Love is a Drug that was inserted back into the film where it was meant to be here. You've got extended material in the fantasy sequences, especially with the World War I and the castle siege. And then there's a really big difference between the way the scene goes with John Hamm's High Roller and Baby Doll that connects with the reaction then that he has after he lobotomizes her. And that was the sequence that one of the sequences they put back in kind of really changes the dynamic there where, he does the whole spiel about, him really wanting her to give herself to him willingly, like he doesn't want somebody who doesn't want this. That's not what he wants. It's not what he's looking for. So, it's really interesting, too, because, Snyder said, too, that this isn't even the full extent of the version he would have. In fact, there would be more musical numbers and everything if he got his way with doing his full version. So this is closer to his original version, but this isn't his director's cut. So it's as close as we're going to get right now, though.
So you're saying that even with the extended cut, there is more footage that was shot and edited that was cut out before even the extended cut got put out. This isn't a difference in vision in that they said, no, you have to cut these musical numbers and not film them. The difference is that he filmed them and they still did not get reinserted in the extended cut. That's fascinating to me. I don't understand why you wouldn't go whole hog with it. It doesn't. Now, did he, because I cannot recall, did he therefore not approve of the extended cut? Was the extended cut a creation of the producers? Was it something where he walked, or was it something where they, like Alien 3, the quote unquote director's cut, which is really an assembly cut, which is really a special edition, which is, however you refer to the version that's not theatrical of Alien 3. Fincher was not involved in it, but somebody else came in and said, this is what he shot, and I'll put it together to try to approximate what he was going for. Is it that type of situation, or is the extended cut something that Snyder says this is good enough for now?
Yeah, that's a question that I don't really have an answer to. When I was doing my research, I didn't really, there was an article from Screen Rant that they had a pretty good definition of what what wasn't there and what had been put back and all that. But I don't know. My guess is that Zack probably had something to do with it. But that he really, I think there's a version of this that's in his head that the studio, I guess, just wasn't up for, So, which is, again, it's interesting because we're kind of getting to that point of his career where we're going to, obviously once we get to BVS and Justice League, it's the biggest examples of that. But here's a place where the studio does it to him, where they just don't allow him to fully put his vision on screen. And I think that's the thing, is like, now I'm still wondering, does the movie still suffer because maybe even the extended cut might have gotten a better, rep if it had been released? Because having seen both, I'd say I responded much better to the extended cut.
Well, what's interesting is that 18 minutes is an eternity in terms of film. People, I think it's easy for all of us. I'm not saying me versus the world sort of thing. I'm saying myself included. There is such a marked difference in 18 more minutes of film. It's easy for all of us to forget because of the proportion of film to, film shown. We might say, 2 or 3 minutes, whatever, an hour and 57 minutes. What does that make a difference between 2 hours? It's like, it can make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
I always go back to, there was a movie, and this is the weirdest thing to be stuck in my head. It really is weird because it's not even a movie that I've seen, but there was a movie called Sirens that came out in the early 90s, I think.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Ellie McPherson was in it,
Yep,
supermodel.
Yep.
And it created a big hubbub because she was nude in it. And I remember reading an article at the time saying it was 70 seconds of nudity in the film. And I was enough of a film neophyte at the time that the article took time to explain that doesn't sound like a lot, but if they had gone, X number of seconds more, they would have gotten a harsher rating and had to cut stuff. So like, mere seconds can make a difference in a film. What jumps out at me is you mentioning how the musical number I'm legitimately curious to watch the theatrical cut now because I cannot conceive of that musical number not being in the movie, the one that you mentioned with Love is a Drug.
Yeah.
And then being over the end credits. If it's over the end credits, that is a completely dissonant experience. It is completely bipolar from what the film is trying to say at the end.
No, I 100% agree with you. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I just didn't respond as well to the theatrical cut back in the day, because you are left with this really strange place to be, whereas inserting it back into the film makes so much more sense because this is the place to which, Baby Doll and the rest of these characters are kind of, I guess, quote unquote, living. At least Baby Doll is. This is what her mind has done to this place, which I guess leads me to a really interesting question for you that I wanted to get to. So you've been walking through on House Lights, Nolan's work, right? And you guys just talked about, today I was actually listening to y'all's conversation on Inception. And what actually surprised me is that this is the movie where I feel like Zack Snyder begins to pick up on some Nolan-esque qualities. Because this is the first time that, one, Snyder wrote his own material. This is the only film that he's done where it's completely only him. This is all his idea. But the idea that in this movie we have 3 different layers to it was really interesting to me. And it kind of just reminded me a little bit of what Nolan had done in Inception, where you have the different layers of the dream. And in many ways, this is a different layer of a dream.
Yeah, no, I that was actually something that had jumped out at me, was the whole layers thing. I don't think you can see any film and not think of Inception at that point of, okay, so we're 3 levels deep and then we just came up to the second level, but that's not reality, sort of thing. And then at the end, there's of course the question, did we ever actually leave the dream?
Right.
Or are we still trapped inside of it, which is both liberating and depressing depending on how you look at it. In those sorts of terms. What I found interesting is the fact that there is very much this is an incredibly, I don't know how else to put it, but there are 2 things that stood out. One, it's like an all-female 300 in a sense. And there's also the fact that this is an incredibly interesting intellectual beatdown of the way men treat women through history.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating because it does what science fiction supposedly aims to do, which is not reflect reality or the way we think things should be, but put things in a different context to make us ask certain questions about how we perceive history or relationships or where things are going. It doesn't beat us over the head and just, what a terrible movie this would be. And I don't mean terrible in terms of bad movie. I mean, what a soul deadening, painful movie this would be if we watched the reality of what's happening to Baby Doll and the women in this institution. That story is there. And so what this does is this still presents those questions, but dresses it up in metaphor and says, okay,
right,
figure it out. Figure it out, because at the end of this, what's interesting is that you're left with the question of, okay, what did each of these things represent? What was actually happening here?
Yeah, I love that you went there so quickly, because I honestly think that's the most important thing with the film, and it is definitely something that, doing some research, Zack specifically said, he had already done pretty much the whole male movie, and his desire was to do a female-led movie. And in some ways, the way, we talked about 300 kind of deconstructing these ideas of like the anti-war, the anti-war movie. This is the look at not only the way that men have treated women in film, but it's many of the ways in which we as a populace have looked towards film and women in film as well. Mm-hmm. Like we kind of go towards film and say, we want this. So we want objectification. We want, all of these type of things. And in some ways, I think this is almost, it's a sly critique even on the porn culture too, even though I think that's a little bit less. But, Snyder said he basically wanted this to be kind of like Alice in Wonderland with machine guns. And the same thing with Alice in Wonderland being a layered metaphor for all of these things. This is definitely a metaphor, I think, for, and you nailed it, the way in which kind of men have treated women, and in many ways, the way in which men try to keep women in a specific box, and I thought that was really strong, and I thought it was really interesting because, and I wanted to know if you agreed with this. We talked a little bit in watching about the sex scene there, the kind of the lurid nature of it, right? And our response to it, and whether or not we thought it was longer or too long and all that kind of stuff. One of the things I was really impressed with this movie is that instead of ever objectifying the women with the camera, we never do that in this film. These girls are dressed up in these more, sexualized outfits, but there's never a moment where the camera spends time accentuating that in the ways to which we're used to the characters having that done, say in, like, I'll just use the original Transformers movie with Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox. There's that classic shot where the camera just moves right up her body as she's leaning over the car. Complete objectification of Megan Fox and that character, right? We're meant to think only one thing from her, which is sex appeal. Now, obviously, that movie kind of plays with that a little bit here, but this never does that. And so Zack is specifically choosing to not objectify these women, even though they're in these clothes, which would be easy for the camera to focus on certain body parts. It never does, and I was really impressed with that being the case, because just case in point, we never actually see Baby Doll dance. We never see this amazing gyration of body parts, right, that just leaves people absolutely speechless, which is a choice I think he makes, because that is part of the message of the film.
Right. And I think that it can't be overlooked, and you touched on this, that in terms of the industries that it's looking at, this is a critique of film and theater and dance in specific. This is a critique of show culture in and of itself, because she escapes to a reality that we typically associate with the rags to riches story and the great success of women in Hollywood. And instead it throws that additional specter of the odious male producer, who we know only too many of throughout history, who treat women as if they own them, that they are property of theirs, that your purpose is to make me money, is to be an object for me to attract other investors and audience members that want to escape and make love to you, sort of thing. And I do agree with you very much about the camera not lingering, and I enjoy the point you make about Inception. But if we really want to go with sort of the way that we were looking at Nolan through House Lights, is Nolan is a director, and I think we found this with Snyder as well, that you can you can see where he's growing when he discovers how to refine his love of slow motion in high impact moments, his love of the moment, of slowing it down and really just enjoying this tableau, because there are tremendous tableaus in this film. Again, like, it's very obvious that Snyder sees pictures in his head, and he's going to get to that picture. But I actually wrote down, and I don't typically write down stuff while I'm watching, not in a feverish rate like this, but it's at the 39-minute mark when the girls sit down in front of the mirror, and we're behind them, and they're looking at their reflection, and the camera keeps panning around them, and then it passes the mirror, and then they're still talking, and there hasn't been a cut. And I know that there has to be some technical wizardry here that they've done or whatever, but now you're on the other side of the mirror. It's visually showing you this is not reality, because
it's through the looking glass,
right? But it's so masterfully done that I actually appreciated it so much, and how well it was done, and kind of mind-blowing, because when I see something like that in a film and it takes me out of it for a second, not in a bad way, but in a good way, to say, how did you do that? I have to figure out how, I have to engineer in my head. I have to write down that I have to go back to 39 minutes and figure out where you did the cut, how you use the visual effect. Were you doing two cuts and then you mashed it together? Like, that shot in specific, I want to sit down with Snyder and Larry Fong and say, walk me through it. I want you to draw for me. I use these little action figures and a little box representing the camera, and show me where the actors and the crew were and how we got to that point. Because I think it's one of the most technically proficient moments I've seen in a film in recent memory. It was just stunning.
Yeah, and I like that you bring that up, the idea of just the way he's growing, because I think this is an evolution of what we saw in 300, where Zack is completely creating a world of his own. You know, this is like George Lucas on steroids, right? Like everything is under his control. The way all the shots look, the gradation of the color, everything is at his fingertips, and he's creating a world whole cloth, right? In much the way that George Lucas did, except with all the technology at his fingertips to be able to do it in the way that he wants. And I think that's something that, you know, I've heard people complain, and obviously I don't want to talk about this too much, but I've heard people complain about the look of Justice League with that it just all looks so fake, right? Like it all just looks like, but Snyder is kind of a master, I think, of that, of creating an entire world, an entire look, so you feel enveloped in this world. Like you're never lost for a moment, in the sense that you don't feel a part of the world he's creating, right? And right. I think that here we're absolutely seeing growth from 300 to Sucker Punch, where he is truly creating a world of his own, and it is truly out, you know, Zack Snyder's Wonderland, in the sense that everything is working together, and at that you've created 3 distinct worlds to which you are a part of in this film, and that's another masterful stroke as well, because each one has its own look and feel. And each one is distinct enough so you immediately know which one you're in. You know, so I think all of that, combined with what you're talking about, like just the technical aspects of so many of the shots they create, we're really seeing an evolution of him as a filmmaker. And it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of cool. Like, you know, even just from 2 films ago, he really has grown.
Yes. And it's difficult because I think we wind up overemphasizing our appreciation for it, which I think visually, this film, it's hard to overemphasize that, because to your point, this is a film where I could watch any sequence in it, any moment, any moment at all, even a single shot, and I would say, if you gave me a multiple choice thing and Zack Snyder's name was on it, 100% of the time I'd get it. There isn't a single moment in this film that feels like somebody else's movie or even a compromise. Now, there have to be compromises. I'm sure that he and Fong I'm sure that the production designer, you know, he says, "Oh, I want this," and the production designer says, "Great, go talk to the effects guys. I can't build that," you know, that sort of thing. I just think that it is, to your point about the world creation, it is an unfair criticism, and I've grown to appreciate this as we've watched more of his films. It's an unfair criticism for people to look at it and say, "I don't like things that look like that, therefore it's bad." Okay, you don't like things that look like that. That's actually great. That's fantastic, because what it means is that you have a very easy visual cue in the trailer not to go. And that doesn't mean I want people to dislike or not go to Zack Snyder movies.
Right.
It means that if I see something, right, just to take it to a funny place, the song "Glory of Love" by Peter Cetera from Karate Kid Part 2. If they ever put that on a trailer, I will never go see a movie that has that in the trailer, because I know I don't like it. Never. I won't do it. So this is a guy doing his thing, and he's got a crew that's making that vision happen. I don't agree with looking at it and saying it's bad. You just don't like it. Okay, that's fine. That's a totally different thing. Right. Yeah. Some people like deep dish pizza. God bless them. They're monsters. But, to each their own.
I'm a monster then, because I love
deep
dish pizza. Yeah.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
So
New York slice all the way, period.
Hey, look, I'm Italian. I love all kinds of pizza. I love New York slice.
Fair enough.
I love the Chicago. Pretty much if it's pizza, I'm going to eat it. And so
I'll admit that I finally had a good Chicago deep dish pizza like a year ago, and I was like, it's not as good as New York, but yeah, okay, it's a bit now at this point. So. One of the things that I thought was really interesting thematically here, too, that this movie was doing is that it is showing the way in which this perpetual system of over-sexualization of women encourages a specific behavior in men. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but tied with the sequence in the World War I trenches, we have these men who are hollow. And in many of the ways, what I had referenced in our conversation on Legends was C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man and Men Without Chests. They're hollow. And that this objectification, sexualization of women, treating them as property, all of these type of things basically makes men hollow beings. And I thought that was fascinating and really astute of Zack to see, because and what's fascinating too is knowing, Zack is married to Deborah Snyder, who is his production partner, incredibly strong woman, fantastic woman, so you can tell Zack has an incredible appreciation for strong, confident, competent women. And so you can see him pouring that into this movie, saying, guys, your objectification of women, your sexualization of women, and treating them as if they are only meant for one thing of sex is missing out and making you less than a man. Yeah, and then there's monsters and dragons and all of these beasts, and every foe that they go up against is a horrific male creature of some sort. With the exception, of course, of the dragon and everything, but even that is, representative of that. Dragons are never, their fire and their brimstone and their pain and their anger, and there's this. So every mission, quote unquote, that they go on in this fantasy world, all has to do with the men get more and more monstrous as it goes forward. And that's happening while we're in this fantasy land where Oscar Isaac's character is the monstrous producer. And so I just think that it's really, to your point, interesting. Those sorts of portrayals. I think that there's also an interesting that he took an interesting opportunity here to indulge, as he did in Watchmen, and I pinged him for it in Watchmen, to indulge that music video sensibility. I mean, the beginning of the movie is essentially a music video, right? And there are different music videos throughout it. And what's interesting is I think that they, since the entire conceit of this film is to stitch those fantasies together, I think that's why it's more successful than when he does it in a film like Watchmen. Because in Watchmen, it felt a little wedged in there, whereas with this, it's the bread and butter of the film. It's the thing that comes together to create the arc that you're there for.
Yeah, I agree. I think here it works really well because it is so much a part of the film. Like, it's intrinsically linked to what this movie is, and you have these incredible, sequences where they've gone to that third level, and They're living these outrageous fantasies of these girls being able to do the things that they can't do in real life, but they wish that they could do. You know, one of the things that I thought tied into that, John, was this idea that one of men's greatest weapons here against women is to turn women against women, to turn them against one another. And it's when women are united as a sisterhood together and they stand together that things go south. And that's exactly what happens in this movie. And that's exactly what Oscar Isaac's character is trying to keep from happening this entire film, is he knows that if all these women were to unite against him, you know, they could win, you know. And so it's this movie is really all about, you know, and we see these women with these, you know, fighting with swords and guns and all this stuff, but it's really about women picking up all of the weapons that they intrinsically have and using them together, which makes them stronger together, to not allow themselves to be treated like this. And I think that was really beautiful in this movie, that we see that true sisterhood come out, and it allows these women to accomplish something that allows at least one of them to quote-unquote escape this horrendous life.
Let me ask you a question, because I know that we've addressed several times about how this film deals with the objectification and treatment of women. Do you think that there is any sort of underlying rejection of the material because it was written by Zack Snyder? That he didn't have a female screenwriter come on to write it for him, but he chose to write it? Do you think that this film is more readily accepted if he doesn't do it that way? I'm not saying that I agree with that. I'm asking in a very non-confrontational, non-controversial, I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong sort of way. But do you think that it helps with the perception of the film if it were not written by him?
I think that you've hit on something. I think that Zack Snyder had already created himself a aura that especially with 300, he already had a movie, I think, that is misunderstood by many people because people were only looking at the surface. And I think that happens with this film as well. I think it's disappointing that would happen because this is a man who is a father of daughters. He is the husband of an incredible woman. And to say that he cannot write a story to speak to these issues about what he feels men have done to women. I mean, I think that this is a powerful statement for a man to be able to recognize the way in which men have mistreated women over the generations and you know, throughout many societies through all of time, you know. And so, but I think you are right that there's something about it coming from Zack specifically, and him being a man, that people do seem to just kind of dismiss it out of hand as if maybe he doesn't have something good to say about these issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I'm getting at. And it's not like I'm not saying I don't understand, and I'm not saying that I reject anybody's criticisms out of hand at all. I want to be extremely clear about that. I just think that you actually said it perfectly, that he has a reputation by the time this movie comes out that people have. I think that 300 is still with him. I think 300 will always be with him. To this day, one of the things people talk about is how ripped and buff and you know, macho his guys can be in
and there's
in
more
the films.
Objectification of the men in that movie than there, you know, well, like for the most part.
I just think it's interesting because of the way that it's constructed. There's no question that I think the male characters who are objectionable, who are terrible people in this film, I think that there's something to another man knowing how to, especially when we're talking about something that's acting as a commentary on show business itself. He's obviously encountered people like Oscar Isaac, and he's undoubtedly encountered people like, the high roller. Like, there are unquestionably men he has run across like this. And so there's, in a sense, there's almost a subtle calling out of attitudes that he's encountered. I can't speak for him. I didn't sit down and write it with him, and I haven't interviewed him about it, but that's what it strikes me as, whether intentional or not. An artist always has a subconscious level at play. And I think that probably these character types, especially just the way that they look at the women and the way that they treat the women, I'm sure he hasn't seen anything on the level of what's done in this film. But I think that he very much has gotten performances out of the men that shaped how we see them. And that, that brings me to something I praised him for previously, but he gets some incredible performances in this film. Like, ridiculously incredible performances. You mentioned Oscar Isaac. Oscar Isaac, I had no idea he was in this. And I'll go ahead and say it. I've said this before, but Oscar Isaac, holy Moses. Like, every time I see him in a project outside of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the first thought that pops in my head is, man, that guy was wasted in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Like, now, to be fair, I've said that about Boyega and Ridley as well, but like, it's just one of those things where I see Oscar Isaac performance here, and I just, wow, it just sort of floors me. I think Carla Gugino is terrific in this. I think that she's great, and I think the female cast is stellar. Like, all of these performances are very rich performances, and I think Scott Glenn's performance, I loved it. I loved the whole thing of him coming back like an angel in each setup. It was just wonderful.
We all knew that Scott Glenn was like the angel of light anyway,
Right.
So, which is funny from his Daredevil performance and all those kind of things. Obviously, too, I always loved him in Hunt for October.
Yep.
But, it's interesting, you mentioned Oscar Isaac, and I thought it was really interesting because this performance reminds me a lot of his performance in Ex Machina, where he plays this kind of likable and then utterly terrifying person at the same time. Really good, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, Emily Browning and Abby Cornish and Jenna Malone and Vanessa Hudgens and Jamie Chung, all fantastic. Carla is wonderful as always. I mean, the little tiny bit we get of John Hamm in here is great.
Yep.
Like, everybody's giving a phenomenal performance, and I think you're absolutely right. Not only that, but I mean, these girls had to go through intense training. Like, they did months and months and months of physical training to be able to pull off the roles that they did because of all of the action sequences they had to be a part of and the different weapons they had to be, looking proficient with and all of those kind of things. And so, I mean, absolutely, Zach is bringing out in people the best. So I think that's going to be something that, we'll see. And I'll honestly say, I think we see that in the rest of his films. We'll see too. Like, he gets great performance from people, regardless of whether you like the movie or not. Everybody's top notch. He's a very good filmmaker when it comes to casting.
Oh yeah. Oh, there is absolutely no doubt about that. And I think his choice of music is phenomenal. I enjoyed the covers that he had in here. Those are always a treat. But he has a good ear, and I think that can't be undervalued. I think he has a really a good gift for picking the right music to go with his film.
No, I agree with you there too. And so one of the things, John, that really connected with me in this film was something that we have the wise man say, Scott Glenn's character. He says that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that fits so perfectly with what we were talking about with Legend of the Guardians.
Yeah.
With this idea of if you have no foundation, if you have no foundational morality, you have no foundational story, if you have no foundation, you'll fall for anything. And I was like, man, what an interesting theme here to see continuing in Snyder's films. The very next film, we have somebody just actually literally say that, and it kind of, I think it plays into something that what we see with the way these men are treating these women. We see men who really don't believe in anything beyond themselves and their own pleasure, and that is a pinpoint that I think Zack is going to get at with culture throughout the rest of his movies, of this danger of not having a foundation in something that's strong enough to hold that foundation and being wishy-washy. Mm-hmm. And it's just really, really good.
Yeah. It is. I can't really add to that. It's interesting as well because we talked about previously how Watchmen is the end of a chapter in his work of the idea of a world without God, without faith. And then we pivot. We seem to pivot after that. And you have Legend of the Guardians. And I think now you have this about the importance of believing in something. And that, this film says very specifically at the end, it's you. You are your hero. You need to go. And it wound up being a very powerful message. I was caught completely off guard that if you even strip away all of this other stuff that we're talking about, the way men behave badly and throughout history and all of these things, you get still at the end that you're never helpless. You can, it's like that Rocky sentiment. Fight, keep fighting, never give up, never give in. And that's the difference. And it is meaningful. It's very meaningful. It's one of the necessary features of all of our storytelling throughout history. Don't give up. Keep going forward. You gotta, you're going to get dealt bad hands. You have to keep working at it. You have to believe that somebody else will help you, because I love that whole flip at the end where Baby Doll says, it wasn't me. It's your story. I'm just along for the ride. I'm obviously not quoting directly, but when she realizes the sacrifice is her, and she says, you're the one that has to carry forward. I'm doing this for you. It's not for me. That is a very powerful sentiment that seems to carry forward through his films from this point forward as well. Well,
and I love that you're going there, because I think, something else that Scott Glenn's character says is that for those that fight for it, mm-hmm. life has a flavor the sheltered will never know. And it's that fight not just for yourself. Like you said, right. Baby Doll realizes this fight isn't about her. It's about her being able to save somebody else. Yep. It's about being willing to give our lives for somebody else. And that's an interesting theme, obviously, because that's going to play into the rest of Zack's works as well, right? Like, mm-hmm. Are we willing to truly sacrifice everything we love and that we stand for? Are we willing to put that all on the line and make the ultimate sacrifice? And so, I think there is such a beauty to that, because what this movie has to say, I think, is sadly missed on so many people. And I thought that what was beautiful about it at the end, too, is that it doesn't say that all men are like this, because we do have Scott Glenn's character at the very end of the film being the bus driver who's willing to be the man who stands up for the woman in need.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that he's her savior. He's just on her side.
Right.
And it's so important. It's so beautiful because it's not an us versus them thing. It's We're in this together as a species, and we have to treat each other with the respect and dignity to which we all deserve because we're created in God's image, right? Like, that's the beauty of what this says. Like, there is a way to do this. There's a way not to do this. And you can even be a hollow man, or you can be a man that is completely full and a part of this fight together with women, not against women. And I think there's and in that, it's a fight for humanity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, what's interesting is we seem to be in agreement on this film. This is my first time seeing it at all. This is your second time, but you're seeing a different cut. My question to you is this, before we jump into what we're going to rate it, what have you. I have purposely not given a rating, and I didn't speak to you before we recorded. You asked me.
It's true.
You asked me about it, and I said I'm not saying a thing until tomorrow. So, given the fact that we know now about the quote unquote three different cuts, or at least three different visions. Number one, do you have a desire to see a quote unquote Snyder cut of this film? Because sometimes directors can keep adding too much. Sometimes directors have to be reined in. Somebody has to take their hand off the steering wheel and say, no, you got it. Stop. You don't need to paint anymore. It's okay. Do you have a desire to see a Snyder cut of this film? And what do you rate it?
I think I would love to see a Snyder cut just out of curiosity, honestly. I think having experienced his directorial cuts, they've always been better for me, and so I would be interested to see if it made it better. Now, I will say this extended cut, I think, makes the movie better. And even through this conversation, I was waffling on where my rating was. I'd put it on Letterboxd and I'd give it a certain rating, but I honestly think because of the conversation we had, I don't know if anybody could hear it in my voice, a little emotional in some points, just because of the subject matter. And for me, heartily agreeing with what I believe Zack is saying about this subject, and how important I think it is. I have to give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think this is not a perfect film. And I don't know where I would change it or what I would do to it, and maybe it's just that maybe I can sense that there's still some room for movement for Zack to be able to do some things with, maybe that's what it is. But I really responded to this movie in a way that I did not expect to, because I came into this movie not liking it very much. I think it was like at a 2.5, maybe 3 stars when I came in from. So, like your experience with the theatrical cut and then the director's cut of Watchmen, I've definitely shifted on this film. And so, absolutely, that's where I land with this. So, I'm fascinating because I don't know where you're going to land. Obviously, we've had a great conversation and we've been in agreement for the most of this podcast, but I don't know where you're going to come down star rating wise. So where are you, man?
Well, first I'll answer the question about the Snyder cut of this. I would be interested, but I wouldn't want him to tinker with it, because I think this is a 5-star film.
Wow!
It blew me out of the water.
Amazing!
I was not expecting this. I was not expecting
Sonny Bunch was right.
even in all seriousness, knowing the reputation that it had, and even given that, and everybody can say that they don't, but they do, given that something with a terrible reputation, there's always a contrarian impulse that gets activated immediately. Oh, yeah? You think it's that bad? Well, guess what? Plenty of times you can walk into RoboCop 3 and say, they were right. It was that bad. But this, I hesitate to see the theatrical cut because I'm horrified to think of what it was like. Just, I don't know how you take that musical number, Love is a Drug, out of the film. And I also don't know how the hell you end the film with it. Like, who made that decision? That's insane. That is an absolutely boneheaded, bonkers decision. That in and of itself would have knocked a whole star off of this. If not, I can't even imagine a cut of this film like that. I don't want to. But yeah, I wound up with 5. I loved it from beginning to finish. I thought every bit of it worked. I thought that everything took the right amount of time. I was impressed with the level of animation and homage that was done in a fresh and original way. I loved the fact that it was done it didn't care what reality was like because it was just nuts. I was proud of myself because I noticed John Hamm in the beginning, and then when he showed up as the high roller, I said, "Oh, I get what this is." And then you mentioned in the theatrical cut they cut that out. That gives so much punch to what happens to her.
Yeah,
so much punch, and it actually gives some agency back to her. And then the ending with that narration, but also with Scott Glenn being the bus driver was a great moment with her getting on the bus and going off, and you're left with the question, is this still the dream? Is it reality? Did she really get away? What happened with her? I want to know. And then to end with that perfect little monologue and then ending with, it's you. It emotionally was very impactful at the end. And I just think it's one of those things where I don't think that the rest of the discussions are going to go necessarily the way you want them to. But I can say...
Are you Luke Skywalkering me right now? This is not going to go the way you think.
Yes. Well, with less hair, you
never know, though, man. You could surprise yourself. So
with hair?
No.
I mean, that would be great.
With your reaction after the experience you've had.
We'll see. That's all I'll say. We'll see. But yeah, I like this is the type of film where if this were the first and only thing I saw from Zack Snyder, I would say I want to see everything he's done. What else is happening here? What else is this guy doing? And honestly, when you go back through everything, and I'm looking at this journey, and 300 is a 5-star film. This is a 5-star film. Watchmen, the director's cut, is a 4-star film. And Legend of the Guardians is a 4-star film. Snyder's output up to this point in the conversation is far superior than his reputation with certain film cultists would have you believe. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. Up to this point, I would say we've made you a Snyder fan, which is really cool.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
I think, it's warmed my, I mean, it brings warm feelings to my heart, as Yoda would say, to hear you so effusive about Snyder. But the thing I love about this podcast is that, we both come in at very honestly. And, again, I didn't expect to have this reaction to this film. I came in a place where it was like 2.5, and it just completely changed. And so I guess what we need to do now then, as always at this point, we need to get our rankings in. And so I want you to go first as to what you would rank then the Snyder films.
Okay. You know what? For some reason, I'm never prepared for this. I never think to write this down because it's like, what the heck, right? I know this is coming. So I'm going a little bit off the fly here. 300 is probably still in my top spot just because I get such a kick and a thrill out of it. But it's kind of a horse race with Sucker Punch. Like, those are his two.
It's pretty cool, man.
Great works right there. Legend of the Guardians, Watchmen, and Dawn of the Dead. And the thing is, I could see Watchmen and Guardians, flipping back and forth, but probably I'm always going to like Legend of the Guardians a little bit more than Watchmen. Just because I think that I think, like I said in our discussion of it, right, it's always, it's number 4 with an up arrow, whereas I think Watchmen is just going to hold steady at 4, and it's fascinating because Dawn of the Dead, I had a better reaction to this time, but it is so obviously if I compare that to Sucker Punch, night and day between what he's capable of and what he accomplishes.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, that I can just heartily agree with you. So I think right now 300 still reigns supreme. Obviously for me, that is in a dead heat with Watchmen in the sense that those could alternate. But then for that next position, it's dead heat between Sucker Punch and Legend. Like, those are, and completely surprising in that way. That Sucker Punch would have become a film to which is rivaling itself for the best of Snyder so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it could even be more in the conversation that it's more rivaling 300 and Watchmen, but I think it's gonna stay rivaling Legend. And then you've got Dawn of the Dead at the end right now. But it's just so much fun, and I'm so excited to we're gonna dive into Man of Steel, we're gonna dive into Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition, and then we're gonna get to Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'm so excited, to be able to do that, and I can't wait. This is we were texting back and forth as we often do throughout just about every day. And I was just like, man, I just look so forward to, we record on Thursday nights together to do this. And I just look forward to it because I have so much fun. And honestly, it's been such a surprise up to this point as to your opinions and watching those kind of like blossom. So if people want to catch up with you though, John, and maybe talk a little more Zack Snyder with you, or anything else you've got going on, where can they find you?
Oh, nobody should want to do any of those things, but I'm Kessel Junkie on your social media network of choice, KESSELJUNKIE. It's better to go for Letterboxd or Goodreads. I have a little bit more fun on those platforms than the other ones. You can find me actually over on the Nerd Party, appearing on the aforementioned House Lights, where we, pick directors and we do sort of what we're doing here, where we just look at their works and everything like that. And you can find me regularly appearing on Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast, with an esteemed co-host by the name of Matthew Rushing. So, Matt, where can people find you?
Well, you could find me on social media under the name MattRushing02. If I am on that platform, that's the name you'll find me under. Of course, you could find me all over the place, podcast-wise, here on the network doing the 602 Club, the main show, where we're talking about all the fandoms we love. John's frequently a guest over there. We're literally talking about as many fandoms as possible. Yes. You can also find me doing shows over on the Nerd Party Network, not only doing Aggressive Negotiations, but I do Owl Post with Ray Kaufman as we talk about Harry Potter each and every week, one chapter at a time. And we are legitimately, I keep saying this, but we're almost done with that series. We've got, I think 8 episodes left, so it's crazy. So, wow. As that, journey comes to an end. So, but, you know what, guys, we want to say a huge thank you for joining us.
This is Snyder Cuts.